I'll never forget the sound that came from behind my bedroom door that afternoon. It wasn't the kind of sound a woman hears and misunderstands. It was low, breathy, unmistakable. I froze in the hallway, bouquet in my hand, my heart slamming against my ribs. Just hours earlier, I'd been helping my son Tyler get ready for his wedding. My husband Daniel had said he wasn't feeling well and went upstairs to rest. But the laughter echoing from our room didn't sound sick, it sounded sinful. Slowly, I pushed the door open. And there they were, Daniel, my husband of 32 years, and my son's fiancée Lily, tangled up in our bedsheets like a cruel joke. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as if my own heart were strangling me from the inside. Daniel's back was to me, and when Lily saw me, she gasped and scrambled for the blanket. Her makeup was smudged, her hair wild, her wedding veil lying crumpled on the floor like a symbol of everything broken. "Marianne, wait. This isn't what it looks like," Daniel stammered, his face pale as a ghost. "Not what it looks like." I choked out a bitter laugh. "You're in our bed with the woman who's supposed to marry our son in 3 hours. What exactly am I supposed to think this is?" My voice cracked, but the fury underneath was sharper than glass. Daniel had always been the charming one, the man who could make anyone believe his side of the story. Even now he tried to step closer, hands out like I was some hysterical wife he could calm with sweet lies. "Please, Marianne, listen to me," he pleaded. "Lily came in here upset. Tyler said something cruel. One thing led to another, his words blurred into noise." Lily sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, but her eyes darted away from mine. The room reeked of perfume and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them both feel what I was feeling. 32 years of loyalty, of sleepless nights raising our son, of holding this family together, and this was how it ended? "You disgust me," I said quietly. I turned to leave, but Daniel's voice followed me like a stain. "Marianne, please don't tell Tyler," he said. "We can fix this. He doesn't have to know." That was when I laughed, an ugly, hollow sound I didn't recognize. "Doesn't have to know?" I repeated. "Daniel, our son is marrying that girl today. What exactly do you think happens when she walks down that aisle?" His silence was answer enough. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding, tears burning hot in my eyes. Guests were already beginning to arrive, filling the house with laughter and chatter. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. Everything around me felt unreal, the smell of flowers, the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses. I wanted the world to stop, to give me a moment to catch my breath. That was when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Mom," Tyler said softly, his voice calm, too calm. "Can we talk?" I turned to face him, and for the first time, I noticed how pale he looked. His jaw was tight, his eyes red-rimmed. He already knew. Before I could speak, he shook his head. "Please don't go up there," he said quietly. "I know what you saw." My lips parted, but no sound came out. "How long have you known?" I managed to whisper. He looked down, his voice breaking. "Long enough," he said. "And Mom, it's worse than you think." The world tilted under me. Worse than watching my husband with his fiancée? Worse than knowing my family was shattered hours before a wedding? I felt dizzy, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter to stay upright. "What do you mean, worse?" I asked, but he only glanced toward the staircase, then back at me with eyes full of something between pity and rage. Tyler exhaled slowly. "Dad's been seeing her for months," he said. "Before I even proposed." My breath caught. "And you knew?" I whispered. He nodded. "I found out 2 months ago. I wanted to cancel the wedding, but she begged me not to. She said she'd end it with him, that she made a mistake." He laughed bitterly. "Guess you saw how that went." I wanted to hold him, to protect him from the ugliness, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said. "I don't need sympathy, Mom. I just need you to stay calm." Stay calm? My husband had betrayed me. My son had been humiliated. Our lives were unraveling in front of everyone we knew, and my child was asking me to be calm. From the window, I could see guests taking their seats in the backyard. The white chairs, the soft music, the sunlight glinting off the archway Tyler and I had built together. It all felt like some cruel stage set for a tragedy. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tyler's jaw tightened. "The wedding's off," he said simply. "But I want them to face what they've done. Not with shouting or violence. I want them exposed." He looked at me then, eyes burning with determination I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "You always said truth comes out one way or another," he said. "Well, let's make sure it does." I watched him walk away, his back straight, his shoulders squared like a man preparing for battle. I stood there in silence, my reflection staring back from the window, an aging woman in a blue dress, mascara running, her whole world collapsing around her. But beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred, something cold and steady. They thought they'd destroyed me. But they had no idea who I really was, or what I was capable of. 32 years of marriage had taught me patience, restraint, and strength. I had built this family. I had sacrificed for it. And now, I was going to watch every lie burn down to ash. As guests took their seats and the ceremony music began to play, I looked toward the staircase where Daniel and Lily would have to descend, side by side, pretending to be innocent. My tears had dried. My heart still ached, but it beat with new purpose. "Worse than I think," I whispered under my breath, glancing toward the door. "We'll see about that." What I didn't know then was that my son was right. It was worse. Much worse. And by the end of that day, none of us would ever be the same again. What I didn't know then was that my son was right. It was worse. Much worse. And by the end of that day, none of us would ever be the same again. People always said I was lucky. That I had the kind of life women envied. Handsome husband, beautiful home, a son who adored me. But luck has a funny way of fooling people. What they didn't see were the years of sacrifice that built those walls, the nights I stayed up worrying about bills while Daniel slept soundly beside me, or the mornings I woke up early to pack lunches and make coffee before heading to a job that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. I used to believe marriage meant teamwork. That if you gave enough, the other person would eventually meet you halfway. But somewhere along the years, I stopped being a partner and became a caretaker, of Daniel's ego, of Tyler's dreams, of everyone's happiness but my own. When Daniel and I first met, I was 22 and still believed in fairy tales. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who made promises sound like poetry. I'd grown up in a small Ohio town, raised by parents who believed hard work could fix anything. When Daniel proposed under the oak tree behind my parents' house, I thought my life was beginning a beautiful chapter. We moved into a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper, but I didn't care. He had dreams of starting his own contracting business, and I believed in him. I worked double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat while he built connections. Back then, love meant endurance. I didn't realize endurance could also be a slow form of erasure. Years passed, and his charm turned into control. I'd tell him I wanted to go back to school, and he'd smile that same disarming smile and say, "Honey, why waste money on classes when I'm about to land a big job?" I believed him, again and again. When Tyler was born, I put everything on hold. I wanted to give my boy the kind of stability I never had. Daniel's business eventually took off, and we moved into a nicer home in a quiet suburb. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Sunday barbecues, Christmas cards, and a golden retriever named Max. But the woman in those photos? She was exhausted. She was smiling because she didn't know how to stop. Tyler was my light in all of it. Even as a little boy, he had this gentle heart that reminded me why I kept going. When Daniel started working late, too late, I told myself he was just busy. When he began spending weekends networking, I swallowed my suspicions. Marriage, I told myself, was about loyalty, not questions. I didn't know then that silence can become its own kind of betrayal. My friends used to tell me I was too forgiving. But forgiveness felt safer than confrontation. It kept the peace. And in our home, peace always depended on Daniel's mood. What no one knew, not even Daniel, was that I wasn't as helpless as I seemed. My father, before he passed, left me a small inheritance. Nothing extravagant, but enough to invest. While Daniel controlled the household finances, I quietly opened a separate account in my maiden name. I started a modest online business, handcrafted candles and soaps. And by the time Tyler went off to college, it had grown more successful than I'd ever admitted. It wasn't just money I'd built, it was independence. But I never flaunted it. My father once told me, "Power doesn't always need to announce itself, Marianne. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the sharpest cards." I kept that lesson close to my heart. Daniel didn't notice the hours I spent late at night shipping orders or answering emails. He only cared that dinner was ready and the laundry folded. He'd come home smelling like expensive cologne, his shirt freshly pressed, his voice dripping with false tenderness. "You're my rock, sweetheart," he'd say, kissing my cheek. I wanted to believe him, even when his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Sometimes I'd find receipts in his pockets. Hotel bars, fancy dinners for two, but when I asked, he'd laugh it off. "You know how clients are," he'd say. "They expect you to wine and dine them." And just like that, I'd push my doubts aside, telling myself I was paranoid. As Tyler grew older, he began to notice things I tried to hide. He'd ask, "Mom, why does Dad work so late?" Or "Why do you look sad when he calls you sweetheart?" I'd smile and tell him not to worry. I didn't want him to see his father through my tired eyes. When he left for college, I cried for days, not just because I missed him, but because for the first time in decades, I was alone with Daniel. Without Tyler's laughter in the house, the silence felt heavy, sharp. Daniel and I barely spoke. He'd spend most nights in his office, and when he did talk to me, it was about surface things, groceries, bills, the neighbors. I told myself this was just marriage in its later years. People grow apart, right? When Tyler brought Lily home for the first time, I saw the way Daniel looked at her, and I hated myself for noticing it. She was young, beautiful, full of life, the kind of girl Daniel used to charm effortlessly. I told myself it was harmless, that I was imagining things. Lily was sweet, always offering to help in the kitchen, calling me Mrs. Ellis in that respectful way that made me like her instantly. Tyler adored her. Watching them together reminded me of the woman I used to be, the one who believed love was enough. I wanted so badly for him to have the happiness I'd lost. So when he proposed, I was the first to hug him. I even offered to host the wedding in our backyard, thinking it would bring the family closer again. Looking back, I see the irony. The very place I hoped would unite us became the stage for our undoing. Daniel grew restless as the wedding approached. He'd make snide comments about expenses, about how much attention Lily was getting. I thought it was jealousy of youth, an old man's insecurity. I never dreamed it was something darker. The day before the wedding, I caught him standing too close to her in the kitchen. She laughed at something he whispered, brushing her hair behind her ear, cheeks flushed. I remember feeling an odd chill, like my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. I brushed it off, scolding myself for being suspicious of my own husband and my son's bride. But deep down, something in me began to stir, a quiet, heavy dread that refused to leave. Now, sitting here in the aftermath, I see it all clearly. Every sacrifice I made, every moment I looked the other way, led to that bedroom door. I'd spent my whole life building this family brick by brick, and in one afternoon, they smashed it to pieces. Still, I couldn't help but hear my father's voice again in my mind, "Never show all your cards until you're ready to win." For the first time in years, I understood what he meant. My patience, my quiet endurance, they weren't weaknesses. They were weapons. And though my heart was shattered, I still had something Daniel and Lily didn't: control. As I sat alone that night, long after the guests had left and the backyard stood empty under the moonlight, I realized that my years of sacrifice were about to be tested in ways I'd never imagined. I had spent my life saving everyone else. Now, it was time to save myself, and make them all remember who they were dealing with. She had no idea that her years of sacrifice were about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The days after the cancelled wedding passed like a blur of whispers and pity. Neighbors brought casseroles, friends called to check in, but every conversation felt like walking through broken glass. Everyone knew. The scandal had spread faster than wildfire. Daniel avoided me completely, spending his time locked in his office or leaving the house early under the excuse of business meetings. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. He had betrayed me, humiliated me, and yet somehow managed to make me feel like I was the one who'd failed him. That was Daniel's gift, turning his sins into my shame. A week after the wedding that never was, he finally spoke to me over dinner. The table was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. "You embarrassed me," he said flatly, cutting into his steak like we were discussing the weather. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. "I embarrassed you?" I repeated. He sighed, setting his knife down. "You could have handled it privately, Marianne. The whole town's talking about us now." "About me?" He shook his head. "Do you know how hard it is for a man in my position to rebuild his reputation after something like this?" I stared at him, stunned. He wasn't sorry. Not for the affair, not for the betrayal, only for being caught. That was the moment something inside me cracked in a way it couldn't be fixed. I wanted to scream at him, to throw the plate against the wall, but instead I smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "People are talking. But maybe, for once, they're talking about the truth." His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with irritation. Daniel hated losing control, and my calmness unnerved him. He stood abruptly and left the table, muttering something under his breath. I sat there alone, staring at the 2 empty wine glasses, the one he never poured for me anymore, and realized this was our marriage in miniature, me cleaning up the mess he left behind. Tyler had moved out temporarily, needing space to process everything. He stayed with a friend across town, calling me every few days just to ask if I was okay. I lied and told him I was. The truth was, the house felt haunted by what had happened. Every room carried an echo, Daniel's laughter, Lily's voice, my own blind faith. I'd walk into the bedroom and feel the air go cold, remembering what I'd seen. Sometimes I'd find one of Lily's forgotten items, a hairpin, a scarf, and I'd freeze, torn between rage and heartbreak. I wanted to destroy them all, but I couldn't. "Not yet." "Evidence," my mind whispered. "Keep it." Daniel's cruelty grew subtler but sharper in those weeks. He began making little digs at me during breakfast. "You really should start doing something with your time," he'd say, sipping his coffee. "Maybe take a class on how to let things go. Or, you're looking tired these days. Guess all that gossip wears on a woman." He'd smirk afterward, satisfied with the wound he'd made. I learned not to react. That was my power now, silence. Because behind that silence, I was beginning to see the pattern clearly. Daniel wasn't just unfaithful, he was manipulative, entitled, and incapable of empathy. And he had been that way for years. I'd just been too busy loving him to notice. The people around us followed his lead. Our so-called friends began to fade away. Couples we'd known for decades suddenly stopped inviting me to dinners or church events. One neighbor, bless her heart, told me in hushed tones, "You know how it is, Marianne. Men make mistakes. Maybe you shouldn't have reacted so strongly." I stared at her, wondering how a woman could say that with a straight face. "Reacted strongly?" I said. "He slept with our son's fiancée in our bed." She looked embarrassed, muttered something about forgiveness, and left quickly. That was when I realized something painful but freeing. The world often sides with charm, not truth. And Daniel had always been charming. But not everyone turned away. My friend Claire, who'd been my neighbor since Tyler was a toddler, stood by me. She was blunt, fierce, the kind of woman who could see through any lie. "You've been carrying that man for years," she told me one evening as we sat on her porch with glasses of wine. "Time to stop being everyone's soft place to land." I laughed weakly. "And do what instead?" I asked. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Stand up. You've got more strength than you think. You just forgot where you put it." Her words echoed in me long after I went home that night. Daniel must have sensed that shift because his behavior changed again. He started locking his office door, hiding his phone, coming home later and later. But he'd also leave his bank statements lying around carelessly, as if daring me to look. And one night, I did. I shouldn't have, but I did. There were transfers I didn't recognize, large ones, to a name I'd never seen. My stomach twisted. It wasn't Lily's name, but it was someone's. When I confronted him the next morning, he smirked. "You've been snooping?" he asked. "That's beneath you, Marianne." "Not as low as cheating," I replied coldly. He shrugged. "You think you know everything, but you don't. You never did." And he walked out, leaving me with a gnawing sense that I'd only scratched the surface of his deceit. The final straw came a month later, when Tyler came by to collect some of his things. Daniel was in the living room, watching TV, when Tyler walked in. The air grew heavy instantly. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here," Daniel said without looking up. "Dad, don't start," Tyler said, keeping his voice calm. "I just came for my stuff." Daniel scoffed. "You should thank me for saving you from a gold digger." I froze in the hallway, listening. Tyler's voice cracked with disbelief. "You mean the woman you were sleeping with?" Daniel laughed, cruel and careless. "She wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. You'll understand one day." I watched my son's face crumble, and something inside me turned to steel. That was the moment I stopped loving my husband. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Every insult, every manipulation, every betrayal replayed in my mind like a film I'd seen too many times. But this time, I wasn't crying. I was planning. For years, Daniel had underestimated me, believing my quiet nature made me weak. But I was done being everyone's doormat. I had my own resources, my own secrets, and a lifetime of patience he'd mistake for surrender. It was time to remind everyone, especially Daniel, exactly who they were dealing with. But Marianne was done being everyone's doormat. It was time to remind them who they were dealing with. It began quietly, the way storms do, just a few clouds on the horizon that no one pays attention to. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even Tyler. After everything that had happened, I knew I had to move carefully. Daniel had built his life on manipulation. If I wanted to expose him, I'd have to learn to play his game better than he ever did. So, I started small. Every morning, after he left for work, I'd go into his office. I didn't snoop, at least, not at first. I just looked. Patterns tell stories if you know how to see them. Receipts, bank statements, scribbled notes. His desk was chaos, but somewhere in that mess was the truth he'd spent years hiding. The first clue came from a simple yellow sticky note stuck under a stack of old invoices. A name, Elaine Porter, and a phone number. I didn't recognize it. The handwriting wasn't his usual confident scrawl, it was hurried, nervous. I took a picture and slid the note back exactly where I'd found it. Later that day, I called from a blocked number. A woman's voice answered, soft but cautious. "Hello," she said. "Hi," I replied, my heart pounding. "I think you might know my husband, Daniel Ellis." There was a long silence. Then she hung up. That silence told me everything I needed to know. After that, I stopped doubting myself. I began documenting everything. Every unexplained transaction, every call, every inconsistency. My little online business had taught me how to keep records, how to notice details most people overlook. I created a spreadsheet, hidden in a folder titled Inventory 2023. But inside was no list of candles or orders, just evidence. Payments to women I didn't know. Withdrawals made in cash, always just under the reporting limit. Luxury hotel stays billed to his company card. And then, something worse, a series of payments to a law firm. My stomach dropped when I saw the note beside one transaction, retainer agreement. Retainer for what? A divorce? A hidden business? Or something else entirely? I decided to pay the law firm a visit. I dressed carefully, neutral colors, soft makeup, the polite smile of a woman no one takes seriously. When I walked into the reception area, the young assistant looked up and smiled. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Not exactly," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'm Marianne Ellis. My husband, Daniel Ellis, has been working with your firm. I just need to confirm a document he mentioned." She typed something on her computer, frowning. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis, but that file's confidential." "Of course," I said, nodding. "I completely understand." I smiled sweetly, then turned and walked out. But before the door closed behind me, I heard her whisper to her colleague, "That's his wife." I didn't get the document, but I got something better, confirmation. Back home, I called Claire. "You ever hear of a woman named Elaine Porter?" I asked. "No," she said. "Why?" "Because Daniel's been sending her money." There was a pause. "Marianne, what are you going to do?" "Find out everything," I said simply. "No more guessing. No more giving him the benefit of the doubt." Claire exhaled sharply. "You're serious?" "I'm done being the fool," I replied. She chuckled softly. "About time." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, focus. The next morning, I called Tyler. "I need your help," I said. He hesitated. "With what?" "Your father's finances," I told him. "I think there's more going on than just an affair." There was silence, then he said quietly, "Tell me what to do." For the first time since the wedding, we were united again, not as mother and son, but as allies. Tyler worked in IT, and within days, he'd found things even I hadn't expected. "Mom," he said, showing me his laptop screen, "Dad's been moving money between accounts. Some of them aren't even in his name." I frowned. "Whose name, then?" He pointed at one. My blood ran cold. It was Lily's. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. "She's still in contact with him," I whispered. "After everything." Tyler's face hardened. "Looks that way. There's another account too, Elaine Porter. Same pattern." I felt the room tilt around me. "He's paying them both," I said. Tyler nodded grimly. "Looks like it. And maybe more." He looked at me carefully. "Mom, what are you planning?" I met his eyes. "I'm going to end this," I said. "But not the way he expects." Over the next few weeks, I started playing the part Daniel thought I was born to play, the submissive, clueless wife. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, even laughed at his jokes. I saw the relief in his eyes, the way he thought I was slipping back into old habits. "It's good to have things normal again," he said one night. "We've both been through a lot." I smiled across the table. "You're right," I said sweetly. "It's nice to feel settled." But inside, I was miles ahead of him. Each word, each gesture was part of a performance designed to make him comfortable. So comfortable he wouldn't see what was coming. Meanwhile, I contacted an old friend, Frank Delaney. He used to be a private investigator before he retired. I'd helped his wife through a rough patch years ago, and he owed me a favor. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't ask questions. "You want me to follow him?" he said. Discreetly, I replied. "No drama, no confrontation. Just facts." He nodded. "You'll have them." Within a week, I did. Pictures, videos, phone logs. All of it neatly packaged in a folder Frank handed me over coffee one afternoon. "Your husband's a busy man," he said dryly. "He's been seeing Elaine every Tuesday at a downtown condo. And the girl, Lily, he meets her on Fridays. She's still in town." I stared at the photos, my stomach twisting. There was Daniel, holding Lily's hand outside a cafe like they were some happy couple. Another photo showed him entering a sleek apartment building with Elaine, his arm around her waist. The evidence was undeniable. But strangely, I didn't cry. I just felt calm. Numb, maybe. The kind of calm that comes when the worst has already happened, and all that's left is action. "Thank you, Frank," I said quietly. "This is exactly what I needed." He studied me for a moment. "You're not planning to confront him, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, I'll confront him," I said. "But on my terms." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. For years, Daniel had treated me like I was invisible. A background character in his story. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd forgotten I was the one who built that story from the ground up. I was the glue that held it all together. The wife who stayed, the mother who protected, the woman who endured. And now, I was the one with the truth in her hands. Armed with this information, I was ready to teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. The hardest part of revenge isn't the planning, it's the waiting. Every day that I woke up next to Daniel, smiled across the breakfast table, and pretended to believe his lies, I felt a quiet kind of power humming beneath my calm exterior. It wasn't rage anymore. Rage is loud, chaotic. This was different. Cold, deliberate, patient. I had the truth now, tucked safely in digital folders and printed copies hidden in the false bottom of my dresser drawer. I had photographs, financial records, text messages, all the pieces of the puzzle that showed exactly who Daniel Ellis was. The trick would be making him destroy himself with it. I started with kindness. The kind of kindness that confuses a guilty man. One morning, I brought him coffee in bed, the same way I used to years ago before everything fell apart. He blinked up at me, surprised. "What's this for?" he asked. "Just thought you could use a little spoiling," I said with a smile. "You've been working so hard lately." He chuckled, that old smug confidence returning. "You're full of surprises lately." "Maybe I am," I said, setting the cup down gently. He had no idea that the coffee was the least of my surprises. That day, I called Lily. She didn't answer, of course, but I left a message. Sweet, calm, almost motherly. "Hi dear," I said. "It's Marianne. I just wanted to say I hope you're doing okay. I know things between you and Tyler ended badly, but I still wish you well. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." My voice never wavered. I hung up before I could second-guess myself. That message wasn't for reconciliation, it was bait. I knew Daniel would hear about it. Lily was impulsive, and Daniel had a habit of trying to manage the women in his life. Within 24 hours, he did exactly what I expected, called me in a half-hearted attempt to clarify things. "I heard you called Lily," he said that evening, pouring himself a drink. "That wasn't a good idea, Marianne." I looked up from my knitting, pretending to be puzzled. "Why not?" "She's unstable," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You don't want to get dragged into that drama." I tilted my head. "I thought you two weren't speaking anymore." He froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see the truth flicker in his eyes. "We're not," he said quickly. "Of course not." I smiled faintly. "Then you have nothing to worry about." He exhaled, forcing a laugh. "You're right. You're absolutely right." But I could tell the seed was planted, the first crack in his composure. Next, I reached out to Elaine. This time, I didn't call. I sent a handwritten note. "Dear Elaine," it began, "I understand that my husband has been helping you financially. I only wish to ensure you are being treated fairly. Let's have coffee sometime. Woman to woman." I didn't sign it with anger or bitterness, just quiet confidence. Then I mailed it to her office address, which Frank had found for me. It was bold, yes, but I wanted Daniel to feel the walls closing in. Elaine was intelligent, older than Lily, and not the type to tolerate being a secret forever. If he'd been playing her the same way, it wouldn't take much to turn her against him. 2 days later, Daniel came home early. "Rough day?" I asked lightly. "You could say that," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Elaine called me. Said you sent her a letter." I kept my expression serene. "Oh, did she? I was just trying to clear up some confusion. I didn't mean to cause trouble." He rubbed his temples, pacing. "You can't do that, Marianne. You're making things worse." "Worse?" I repeated softly. "For who?" He stopped pacing. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that looked like fear. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked. "You're different." "Maybe I finally learned from you," I said, smiling faintly. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. That night, I began the second phase of my plan. I called a realtor, quietly, anonymously, and listed the lake house under my name alone. Daniel had transferred the property to me years ago for tax purposes, a fact he'd probably forgotten. It was the only asset fully in my control. I wasn't planning to sell it, not yet, but its listing would appear in the local paper, right where Daniel would see it. I wanted him to panic, to wonder what I was doing. Control is everything to a man like him, and nothing unsettles a manipulator more than losing his grip on the narrative. Sure enough, by morning, he was seething. "You're selling the lake house?" he barked over breakfast. "Without telling me?" I looked up from my plate. "It's mine, Daniel. Legally and otherwise." He glared. "That house is part of our family history." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You never seemed that sentimental about it when you were taking other women there." The color drained from his face. For a second, he couldn't speak. "I don't know what you think you know," he stammered. "I know enough," I said quietly. "More than you realize." From that day on, he started to unravel. The once smooth charm gave way to short tempers and nervous glances. He'd come home late, check his phone in the corner, and flinch every time I looked at him too long. The predator was finally starting to feel hunted. Meanwhile, Tyler played his part perfectly. He acted distant with his father but not hostile, just enough to keep Daniel guessing. "He knows something," Daniel confided in me one night, pretending to seek comfort. "You think so?" I said innocently. "He's been quiet, that's all." Daniel frowned. "It's not like him. He's hiding something." I smiled. "Maybe he learned that from you." Then came the final setup, the moment I'd been building toward. I decided to host a dinner. Just a small, intimate one. I invited Claire, Tyler, and, through a carefully crafted email sent from Daniel's account, Elaine. I also included a message for Lily, using the same tactic. The invitations were subtle but deliberate. Let's clear the air. We've all been through enough misunderstandings. I even signed it with Daniel's digital signature. He never noticed. He was too distracted trying to contain the damage he couldn't see coming. The night of the dinner arrived crisp and cool, with rain whispering against the windows. I wore my favorite emerald dress, the one Daniel used to say made me look too confident. He came downstairs looking uneasy. "You didn't tell me we were having guests," he said. "Oh, didn't I?" I replied, setting the table. "It's just family. And a few friends." He frowned, but before he could press further, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Elaine standing there, elegant and composed. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, and for a split second, the mask slipped from both their faces. "Elaine," I said warmly, "how lovely to see you. Come in." And behind her, like fate's cruel punctuation mark, stood Lily. Daniel's expression froze. The color drained from his face, and I saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard. "Marianne," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What have you done?" I smiled, every ounce of my calm composure wrapping around me like armor. "Just dinner, dear," I said sweetly. "After all, we're all family here. Aren't we?" "Just dinner, dear. After all, we're all family here. Aren't we?" The air in the dining room felt thick enough to slice with a knife. The moment Lily and Elaine stepped inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he set down his wineglass, and for once, the great manipulator was at a loss for words. I stood at the head of the table, the calm in the center of the storm I had created. Every detail, the perfectly folded napkins, the gentle clinking of silverware, the soft light flickering across Daniel's face, felt deliberate, like a stage set for truth. "Please have a seat," I said with a gracious smile, gesturing toward the table. Elaine hesitated, her eyes darting between Daniel and me, but she took her place beside Claire. Lily, on the other hand, stood frozen at the doorway, her jaw tight, eyes glistening with something between anger and shame. Tyler appeared from the kitchen, silent and watchful. He didn't greet his father. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to make Daniel shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Well," Daniel began, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land, "this is unexpected." "Unexpected?" I repeated softly. "Darling, you're the one who invited them, remember?" His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Your emails," I said, setting a tablet on the table. The screen glowed with the evidence I'd been saving, the digital invitations sent from his account. His face went pale as he recognized the messages. "Marianne, I didn't." "Oh, I know," I interrupted. You didn't mean for them to see each other, did you? You're very good at keeping your worlds separate. Until tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line as she leaned forward, voice low and trembling. You told me you were divorced, she said to Daniel. You said your wife was just a friend. Someone you were helping through a hard time. Lily let out a bitter laugh. That's what he told me too. Except he said she was sick. That she couldn't give him what he needed anymore. Daniel's eyes darted between them. This isn't what it looks like. Tyler stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. Then please, Dad, he said coldly, tell us what it is. Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke. I made mistakes, all right? But it's not what you think. Not what we think. I said quietly. You slept with our son's fiancée, Daniel. In our home. On the night before their wedding. Elaine gasped, covering her mouth. Lily's face turned scarlet, her chin quivering. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. No, I said, meeting her eyes. It never is. Daniel slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the house. Enough of this. You've gone too far, Marianne. Whatever this is, some twisted revenge game, you've made your point. I straightened, my calm never faltering. Oh, Daniel, I said softly. This isn't revenge. This is truth. You see, I've spent years letting you define what I was. Quiet, dependable, naive. You thought I wouldn't notice the late nights, the new cologne, the missing money from our accounts. His head snapped up. What money? The $40,000 you transferred to your personal brokerage account last spring, I replied smoothly. And the $25,000 you wired to Lily's student loans 2 months later. Lily's eyes widened. He said it was a gift. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Marianne, how did you? How did I know? I interrupted. Because you married a woman who built her own business from nothing. Because you underestimated the same woman who helped you get out of debt 10 years ago. And because while you were sneaking around, I was paying attention. Elaine stood, her expression a mix of rage and disgust. You lied to me, she spat. You used me. She turned to me. I'm so sorry, Marianne. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said gently. You were one of many victims of his charm. Daniel reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Don't touch me, she said sharply. You're finished, Daniel. Claire, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke up. Mom, she said quietly, how long have you known? I turned to her, my voice steady. Since the night before the wedding. I saw them together. She blinked, horrified. And you didn't say anything? I wanted Tyler to have the truth in his own time, I said. And I wanted his father to face it in front of everyone he's deceived. Daniel's anger gave way to desperation. Marianne, please, he said, his voice cracking. We can work this out. You don't want to destroy our family. I took a deep breath, my eyes never leaving his. You destroyed it, Daniel. You burned it to the ground. I'm just showing everyone the ashes. He reached out to me across the table. I love you, Marianne. I let out a small, humorless laugh. No, Daniel. You love control. And you're losing it. Tyler stepped forward, his jaw clenched. Mom, he said quietly, show him. I nodded and picked up a small remote from the table. With a single click, the television flickered to life. The room filled with the sound of Daniel's voice, his recorded calls to Lily, his messages to Elaine, his promises, his lies. I had compiled everything. Proof of every deceit, every manipulation. His face turned ghostly white as his own words betrayed him in surround sound. When the final recording ended, no one spoke. Even the air seemed still. Then, Tyler moved toward his father, eyes cold. You don't deserve this family, he said. Daniel's shoulders sagged. You don't understand, he muttered. No, Tyler replied, I understand perfectly. I rose from my chair, feeling the weight of decades lift from my chest. Daniel, I said calmly, by morning, you'll be out of this house. I've already contacted our lawyer. The accounts are frozen, and the deed to the lake house is in my name. You'll have enough to live, but not enough to hurt anyone else. He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. Don't bother. I'm done listening. Elaine stood, gathering her purse. I'm sorry, Marianne. Truly. Lily followed suit, tears streaking her face. I don't expect forgiveness, she whispered. Then don't ask for it, I said softly. Forgiveness isn't something you beg for. It's something you earn. They left in silence, the door closing behind them with a sound that felt like finality. Daniel sat alone at the table, staring at the cold food in front of him. You think you've won, he said finally. I looked down at him, my voice low but firm. Winning was never the goal. Freedom was. As I turned to leave, the rain outside began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like applause from the universe itself. I paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. This was only the beginning, I said quietly. I've spent my whole life being your wife. Now I get to be me. And with that, I walked out, steady, unshaken, and finally free. This was only the beginning. I've spent my whole life being your wife. Now I get to be me. The morning after the confrontation, the world felt unnervingly quiet. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the stillness that filled the house. Daniel was gone when I woke up. No note, no goodbye, not even the sound of his car leaving the driveway. Just absence, a silence so complete it almost hummed. For a moment, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, sunlight cutting across the floorboards, and I realized how foreign the space already felt. It wasn't our room anymore. It was mine. For the first time in years, it was mine. Tyler came by later that morning. He looked tired but lighter, as if the truth had finally stopped gnawing at him. He brought coffee and 2 bagels, the same way he used to when he was a kid after a fight with his dad. You okay, Mom? He asked, setting the tray down gently. I nodded, though my throat tightened before I spoke. I think so, I said. I thought I'd feel broken after all this, but I don't. I just feel done. He smiled faintly. Dad called me, he said. He said he's checking into a hotel downtown. Good, I replied. Let him face himself for once. The news spread fast, faster than I expected. In a small town, scandal travels like wildfire, and by the weekend, half of Maplewood had heard that Daniel Ellis had been exposed in a family dinner gone nuclear. Elaine resigned from her firm and left town quietly. Lily moved back in with her mother. And Daniel, ever the narcissist, tried to salvage his reputation by claiming I'd set him up. But this time, no one bought it. His clients dropped him. His friends stopped returning his calls. Even his golf buddies from the country club avoided his table. Watching him crumble from a distance wasn't joyful, it was poetic. Claire was the hardest to reach. My daughter had always been a peacemaker, the one who couldn't stand confrontation. For days, she avoided my calls. When she finally showed up at the house, she looked torn between guilt and anger. Mom, she began, her voice trembling, I don't know what to say. Everything feels like a mess. I set down my cup and gestured for her to sit. It is a mess, I said. But sometimes the truth has to destroy what's fake before you can build something real. She wiped her eyes. I keep thinking about Dad. I keep thinking maybe there's still some good in him. I sighed. Maybe there is. But that good doesn't erase what he's done. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. You were incredible that night, she whispered. The way you handled it. I don't think I could have done what you did. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I didn't feel incredible, Claire. I felt like a woman who was finally tired of being lied to. She gave a small laugh through her tears. Tyler told me you planned the whole thing. That you had help. I smiled. Frank helped. So did Tyler. But mostly, it was just me remembering who I used to be. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer, Mr. Hargrove. Mrs. Ellis, he said, Daniels signed the separation papers. He's not contesting the asset division. I felt something loosen in my chest. He didn't even try? No, he replied. I think he knows it would only make things worse. You've got the house, your business shares, and the lake property. You're in control now. In control. 2 words I hadn't heard in my direction for decades. Thank you, I said softly. For everything. That evening, I went to the lake house. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, the way it always did after rain. The dock creaked under my steps as I walked to the edge, watching the sunset ripple across the water. For years, this place had been Daniel's escape, the backdrop to his secrets. But now, it was my sanctuary. I took out the old photo album I'd brought with me, flipping through pictures of our younger years, weddings, birthdays, vacations that felt like a different lifetime. I studied my face in those old photos, hopeful, trusting, unaware. That woman was gone. And I didn't mourn her anymore. A car pulled up behind me. I turned to see Tyler stepping out, carrying a small box. Brought you something, he said. Inside was a stack of envelopes, letters I'd written to him during his college years that he'd saved. I thought you might want these back, he said. I smiled, touched. You kept them? He nodded. I read one last night. You wrote that no matter what happens in life, truth always wins. I didn't understand it back then. Now I do. My throat tightened. You're a good man, Tyler. Better than your father ever was. He looked out at the water. I don't want to become him, Mom. Ever. You won't, I said firmly. You've already broken the pattern. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's life continued to unravel. The firm he once owned collapsed under investigation for financial misconduct. Something I hadn't planned, but karma seemed to handle on my behalf. I learned through town whispers that he'd been living in a rented apartment above a hardware store, drinking too much, avoiding everyone. There was a time that knowledge would have filled me with satisfaction. Now, it only filled me with peace. Justice wasn't revenge. It was balance. Then came a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Daniel's. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, he wrote, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see now what I did to you. You deserved better than me. You always did. There was no apology, not really. But there was truth, and that was more than he'd ever given before. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into my journal. Closure doesn't always come in the form of regret. Sometimes, it's just knowing you were right to walk away. On Sunday, I gathered my children and a few close friends at the lake house for dinner. Not a confrontation this time, a celebration. Claire brought dessert, Tyler grilled steaks, and laughter filled the space that once echoed with lies. As we sat under the soft glow of the porch lights, I raised my glass. To new beginnings, I said. And to remembering that sometimes peace comes after the storm. Claire smiled. To Mom, she said, raising her glass too. The strongest woman we know. The clinking of glasses felt like music, a melody of survival, love, and renewal. As night fell, I stepped outside alone one last time. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. I realized then that forgiveness didn't mean letting Daniel back into my life. It meant letting myself move forward without him. I whispered into the wind, I forgive you, but I'm free now. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. I forgive you, but I'm free now. 6 months passed, and the rhythm of my life changed in ways I never expected. The mornings that once began with the sound of Daniel's voice and the clink of his coffee cup were now quiet, but it wasn't the painful kind of quiet. It was peaceful, healing, almost sacred. I'd started waking up before sunrise, watching the light spill across the lake through my kitchen window. Every sunrise felt like proof that even after the darkest night, something beautiful could still rise. I sold our old house in Maplewood that spring. It wasn't an easy decision, but walking through those halls felt like living among ghosts. Every creak in the floor, every photograph on the wall carried echoes of a woman I no longer was. The realtor asked if I wanted to stage the place for potential buyers, but I told her not to bother. Let it show its age, I said. That's where the truth lives. Within 2 weeks, it sold to a young couple expecting their first child. Watching them smile on the porch as they held hands made me realize something. I didn't envy youth anymore. I envied no one. I was finally content with where I stood. Tyler visited often. He'd opened his own auto repair shop in town, a dream he'd put off for years while working under Daniel's shadow. Every time he talked about a new client or expansion plan, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "You're doing it, honey," I'd tell him. "You're building something honest." He'd grin and say, "Guess I learned from the best." I'd laugh, but deep down, those words meant more to me than he knew. He wasn't just succeeding. He was breaking a cycle that could have destroyed him. Claire, too, found her strength. After the chaos, she went back to school for her nursing degree. "I want to do something that matters," she said one afternoon as we sat by the lake. "Something that reminds me people can heal." I smiled. "You already do that, sweetheart. You've always done that." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, the silence between us felt whole. One morning, I received a letter in the mail, not from Daniel but from Elaine. It was handwritten on soft ivory paper. "Marianne," it read, "I wanted you to know I've moved to Oregon. I'm teaching at a community college now, starting over. I think about that night often, and while it was painful, it set me free. You have my gratitude." I read it twice, then folded it gently and placed it in the same box as Daniel's final letter. 2 lives, 2 betrayals, both behind me now. The past didn't sting anymore. It just existed, like old photographs in a drawer. By summer, the lake house had transformed into my sanctuary. I'd repainted the kitchen myself, turning the walls from pale beige to a warm honey color. The garden, once neglected, now bloomed with wildflowers. Every Sunday, I hosted dinner for friends and family. Nothing fancy, just laughter, simple food and warmth. The kind of warmth that comes from surviving something that could have broken you and realizing it didn't. One evening, as we cleared the table, Tyler pulled me aside. "Mom," he said, "Dad's been trying to reach me." I looked up from the plates. "What did he say?" "He wants to see you," Tyler replied softly. "He says he's been sober for 3 months. He's living in a small apartment near the city." I was quiet for a long moment. The part of me that once would have trembled at the thought of facing him again felt nothing but calm curiosity now. "Maybe I'll see him," I said finally. "Not for him, for me." 2 weeks later, I drove into the city. Daniel looked smaller somehow when I saw him, thinner, older, his once commanding presence replaced by a kind of weary humility. He stood when I entered the cafe, his voice unsteady. "You look good, Marianne," he said. "So do you," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't true. We talked for an hour, mostly about the kids, about the past, about regret. He apologized, truly this time, not in words rehearsed for pity, but with the kind of raw honesty that comes from finally understanding what you've lost. "I didn't know how much I was destroying," he said quietly. "I did," I replied. "That's what made it worse." Before I left, he reached across the table. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't come to make peace with you," I answered gently. "I came to make peace with myself." He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. When I walked out, the sun was setting behind the buildings, painting the sky gold. I didn't look back. Some stories don't need a sequel, they just need an ending. Months later, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, listening to the crickets and watching the twilight settle over the water. Tyler and Claire were inside laughing about something on TV. For the first time in decades, my house felt alive again, not from the noise of chaos, but from the presence of peace. I thought of all the women who had ever stayed silent, who had given everything until there was nothing left of them. I whispered into the night, "You can start over. No matter how old you are, no matter how broken." As the stars began to appear, I took a deep breath and smiled. My life wasn't what I'd planned, but maybe it was exactly what it needed to be. I wasn't just a wife or a mother or a survivor. I was Marianne Ellis, strong, free, and finally whole. Sometimes the people we think are the weakest turn out to be the strongest of all. And I had proven that quiet strength can move mountains. Sometimes the people we think are the weakest turn out to be the strongest of all. And I had proven that quiet strength can move mountains. My love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.